morning, good evening, and good afternoon to everyone joining us from all around the world. My name is Rachel Lofton, and I'm a part of the research team at the Global Sport Institute. Yes, it is quite a mouthful, Kendall, so kudos to you for taking that on. Today, I will be presenting a portion of the project work I did for my master's at the Catholic University of Sacred Heart in Milan, Italy. And so looking at mixed gendered plus sport programs as a tool for a bottom-up approach to gender reconstruction in the sport for development and peace movement. So I want to start with this quote, one of my favorite quotes by Nelson Mandela. Sport has the power to change the world. It has the power to inspire. It has the power to unite people in a way that little else does. It speaks to youth in a language that they understand, and sport can create hope where there was once only despair. So what is sport for development and peace? Sport for development and peace began with the United Nations Millennium Development Goals and continues now through the Sustainable Development Goals. It is the intentional use of sport to attain specific development and peace objectives. Organizations and associations use sport as a vehicle to address several social and humanitarian missions, including poverty eradication, education, health, and gender equity. So this is utilized in developing countries and especially least developing countries. And in these places, there are huge and significant gender disparities. In the recent years, there has been a shift in focus and focusing on women and girls' participation in sport, looking at their participation as a means for girls' empowerment and gender equity. But similar to more general rhetoric around girls' empowerment, the focus has been solely on girls. But what happens if we were to include boys in the conversation around girls' empowerment? So today I'm going to go through some of the current methods and the sport for development and peace movement when focusing on girls' empowerment. I'll give some of my personal recommendations and things I would love to explore more with future research, as well as some of the best practices I've noticed and researched and read about within the sport for development and peace, and then give a couple examples of some interventions that have happened. So the current methods and literature around sport for development and peace either focuses on allowing girls access to mixed gendered sports settings, or they empower them in girls only context. In a lot of the literature, it focuses on redefining the roles for women, but not for men. So when they develop these girls' empowerment plans, they do so with no accompanying plan to address boys, their privilege, their gender roles, or how they see and treat girls. And so when we listen to that rhetoric, sometimes it sends this message to girls that there's something about them that they need to alter and change in their personal identity and experience, but yet that rhetoric is not sent to boys as well. And so if men are not made a priority in addressing girls' empowerment, then how can we ask girls to change one half of the dichotomy when the other half stays the same? And so now that we're in this unusual pause around the world due to COVID-19, I believe it's the perfect time to reevaluate our methods and interventions and look at the ways we approach girls' empowerment. Because building girls' skills, confidence, and agency will be limited if they find themselves in the same restrictive environments. So I think it's important that we not only address the communities that place these constraints to begin with, but their male counterparts within these programs as well. So how do we do this? So through a community-based plus sport program. So Plus Sport utilizes sport as a tool for social change, focusing on the non-sporting outcomes. So in a lot of ways, they bring in sport and use sport as the bait to get the participants in, but focus on a more holistic intervention that focuses on education, health, and wellness. And making it community-based means that the interventions are planned and developed with the community in mind, not just with them in mind, but them involved as well. So it utilizes the local community and the local leaders. And so when doing so, it makes sure that the local leaders are part of the decision-making process. There's absolute transparency, and it keeps the beneficiaries at the heart of the operation. Because when we talk about girls' empowerment and gender equity, the beneficiaries aren't just women and girls, it's the community as a whole. So it's important that the whole community sees themselves as beneficiaries as well. And so when we look at youth sport programs, I do think that childhood is one of the best times for these gender interventions. Because if we look at Erickson's 8 stages of psychological development, specifically stages 4 and 5, when children's worlds are expanding, they're beginning to go to school, developing a sense of self. They're also starting to ask the big questions of who am I, comparing themselves to their peers and building their own idea of who they are as a person. During this time, it's also when they begin their formation of gender, their personal gender ideas, and their concept of gender as a whole. But it is important to note that during this time of early adolescence, it's also one of the most diverse of times of gendering, especially in developing countries. During this time, for boys, their worlds begin to expand, while on the other hand, girls' worlds often contract. And since the ideas of gender are still actively forming, this is an opportune time for an intervention that's focused on gender, because what is culturally constructed can also be socially deconstructed. And so what are some of the benefits of a mixed gender plus sport program? Well, it creates a new visibility and mobility for girls. Often in these developing countries, girls either can occupy the home space or school if they're afforded the opportunity. And so when girls enter into these sport programs, their presence alone begins to disrupt traditional ideas about the spaces in which girls can occupy. So while girls begin to play and experience their bodies in an active and physical way, an experience that is often exclusively held for boys, the girls start changing their views of themselves. They start to reimagine all they can do, their capabilities, and start seeing themselves as athletes. But in this mixed sports setting, while the girls are reimagining who they are, the boys are also seeing the girls in a new light. They're experiencing them in a new way, as athletes themselves, as colleagues, people that they can play with. And so this already just the presence alone already has significant impact on changing the way in which girls are looked and seen, as in which spaces they can occupy. And so while we're teaching girls in these programs that they can be smart, strong, powerful, and worthy, boys will receive the same message about the girls. And so why is this so important? Because one day these boys will become colleagues, they'll become husbands, and they'll become fathers to daughters. So we really want to also engage these boys and seeing these girls as empowered beings, seeing them as their equals at a young age. But it's also important to bring in the community, because as much as we focus on the kids within this community, the parents, the local leaders have significant impact. We want to make sure that the work that's being done within these programs also reaches the community as well. And so when we do a community-based approach, and we have from the very beginning in the development stages, parents and volunteers and local leaders who are involved in the planning and implementation, then it makes them more committed to ensuring the success of the program. Furthermore, you develop a new group of leaders, specifically female leaders. And so for many times, many times, this is the first time women are seen in leadership roles. And women can get involved in multiple levels, whether it be volunteering, coaching, just being a staffer in the group. And we all know how important representation is. So while these young girls get to see themselves in leadership positions for the very first time sometimes, the boys are also seeing this as well. The men are also seeing this as well in the community. And so in doing so, we ensure that every member of the community, or we give the opportunity to every member of the community to become a beneficiary as well. But in doing so, you have to remember that this is not a one size fits all. When you're going into different developing countries, there are different cultural settings and political norms. And so in the implementation process, it's important to have a firm understanding of the social and political climate, ideologies around gender, and religious and customary laws and beliefs. Asking questions like, what are the appropriate and acceptable interactions between men and women in public? Do girls and boys have individual agency? What spaces are boys and girls allowed to occupy? Are they same or are they different? Asking these type of questions to develop a firm foundation and to get the best out of the program, to ensure that these interventions are built for success. I kind of want to give two examples of two sport for development peace interventions. The first one is Football for Peace International. They are an international group founded in 2001 as a research, education, and community engagement program. Today, they've served over 8,000 children and 600 coaches in countries including Israel, Jordan, Palestine, South Africa, and South Korea. In their initial implementation in Israel, they set up a program for girls to play football or soccer, depending on what you prefer. And when they came to finals day, the day that the girls were finally going to compete, there was one oversight in the community that happened. When the girls got to the pitch or field to compete, they were unable to do so. Due to religious and customary law that prevents girls from performing in front of men, the girls had to play on another pitch. And so while the initial thought was admirable, it fell slightly short. We built these girls up, but yet put them on a field that was somewhat inferior, reinforcing this gender inferiority. Today, Football for Peace has grown so much and is such a success and has touched so many people around the world. And so it's great to look back at this initial example as a way to build and reimagine programs. And what we do see is some places, not everything is possible, and it is necessary to have that unique fit. Another example I want to give is MISA. And so MISA is a youth sports organization in Kenya that is focused on inclusivity. Their former chief manager once said that he saw a need to not only empower girls, but enlighten boys. And this is one of the few pieces of literature that really takes gender equity and girls' empowerment away from just access to girls, but really looking at how do you make substantial change within everyone in the community and not just the girls. And in doing so, they make sure that men and women are equally represented on all levels, not just the participants or the coaches, but on their governing board as well. And this in itself does so much for gender equity when you just have the representation alone, when women's voices can be heard in the space, then it really trickles out to the rest of the community. And then they take it one step further and provide opportunities for those with disabilities. In many places, these are the most marginalized and overlooked group of kids that often don't get a chance to play in these interventions and programs, but MISA ensured that they did. And so I think this is a wonderful example that is very intentional, not only about empowering these girls, but focusing on the boys seeing this empowerment and growth within girls as well. And so when we're reimagining these sport for development and peace interventions, it's so important that we engage the local community because gender equity is not a women's issue. So often gender becomes synonymous with women and girls, when in fact gender equity is beneficial for all, and therefore the local community needs that as well. And in doing so, we build these new female leaders and role models who also get a benefit from this. And so they see their own women's empowerment. They gain leadership skills, management, communication, and then that extends on to the kids who are looking at them. And then finally, it's important just to involve the boys, because in these mixed gender settings, seeing the girls alone already begins to break down their ideas of gender, not just for the girls, but for themselves as well. And so I believe that we can't continue to focus solely on the girls, but we also must address the power structures that keep these restrictive gendered environments and constraints as well. And so in conclusion, empowered girls should be able to play alongside enlightened boys. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. All right, we're going to move into our Q&A, and we have an audience member that would like to ask their question aloud. Please go ahead.
Hello, yeah. This is Dumbi Otsinya. By the way, I think it's a great job in and also presenting a unique way of talking about enlightenment for girls by going through the boys aspect. One question I have is, how do you guarantee lasting impacts? Because you talked about also these enlightened boys will become, husbands and fathers? How do you guarantee a lasting impact with your methodology?
There's never a true guarantee with anything. However, I do believe that, and kind of the idea of when you only ask one part of society to change, if you're asking girls alone to do this, it might be a success, but it also could be a failure. I do think that it is important to have the allies involved, and that we need to make these boys allies, and that we need to expose them to these lessons as well. Gender does not mean women and girls. Gender is inclusive of both. And so we need to kind of stop treating it like it's one side of the dichotomy and really look at it as a whole. And this is a lot of preliminary work. There hasn't been too much research done specifically at looking at boys in the conversation around girls' empowerment. And so it's something that I hope could be researched in depth, either by myself or someone else, because I do think it's very interesting. I think definitely it could be very impactful in these developing countries, because so often men, just like the rest of the world, men hold the power, but in kind of a different way. And just girls being able to go into a different space already just disrupts this historic ideas and trends around gender norms. So of course, there's never a guarantee with anything, but a lot of hope and potential. And I think, why not? It's worth the try. I think, like I said before, we're at this pivotal point in time where we can reset our approaches. And I think coming back from COVID, where a lot of these humanitarian aid and intervention has been shut down, stopped, paused, canceled indefinitely, it is important that we really focus on these kids and these next generations and give them purpose and give them hope. And I think that this is one of the beautiful ways that can be done by, again, just building up these girls alongside boys and having the boys build up these girls as well. So I hope that answered your question.
It does. Thank you.
Wonderful. All right, we've got another audience question. Please let us know your name.
Hi, my name is Grace Athanas Linden. I really appreciate this presentation. I just wanted to ask, because boys and girls are already sort of in this cycle where they've been socialized to maybe be uncomfortable playing sports with other girls or boys, how do we get out of that cyclical place where there's this socialization around maybe being uncomfortable playing co-ed, but they're the age we need to target in order to break down those socializations?
Right. Thank you, Grace. That's a wonderful question. And I think, and I love the way you said it, because it is very unique everywhere you go around the world. Just basic interactions in some of these developing countries between boys and girls don't happen. Sometimes even the schooling, you see them separated by gender. So it is something that is a challenge. And I do believe when you come to that one size does not fit all mentality. And when you make it a plus sport environment, you also embody educational programs, health and wellness. And so there are many different ways in which you can start to integrate the boys and the girls. Again, but one thing to note again is knowing the boundaries that might exist in the culture and society that you set foot in. And so, it is a challenge. I do think starting at the younger age, when there aren't so many thoughts about divisions, and again, looking at kind of that stage 4, when they're starting to compare themselves to others. So if you can kind of tap in right then and make it not a boys versus girls comparison, but just make it a me versus you, my fellow athlete, my fellow peer, my fellow classmate, and really start to ungender kind of the separation and really integrate them as teammates, as fellows, as colleagues. But it definitely is something that I think is a constant battle. I think especially where there are places where there's strict divisions and lines between the different genders in society, it would definitely be more of a hurdle. However, we see so many programs around the world that are doing this successfully. I use Football for Peace as one example, but that was specifically what happened in their first round of implementation in Israel. They've grown since then. They've reevaluated their processes. They've gone into other different countries having these mixed gender programs, and it's been a success in other places. So, what might not work one way, one place might work another. but I think it just takes a little bit of creativity, time, and patience.
Great. Thank you so much, Rachel.